Now we're going to solve these two systems using the Gauss-Jordan method. First up is to turn these into matrices. The first one will have 2, -3, 16. And then we'll have 3, 2, -2. Our goal is to have 1s in the diagonal and 0s everywhere else. The right-hand side is just going to be numbers. We don't know what those numbers are just yet. So where that 2 is at in the 1, 1 position, this guy here, we need a 1. We can use the second elementary row operation, which says to multiply by a non-zero number. In this case, we'll multiply by the reciprocal, and that will create a 1 there. Multiplying the first row by 1/2 gives us 1, -3/2, 8. The second row did not change. Where that 3 is at, we need a 0. Again, compare it to our goal. This is where we use the third operation, where we multiply a row by a non-zero number and add it to another row. Use the 1 we just created. 1 times what plus 3 makes 0? -3. So if we multiply the first row by -3, add it to the second row, that will create the new second row. Off to the side, let's figure out what -3 times the first row looks like. So we're going to multiply this row here by -3, and I'm going to write those values off to the side. That'll give us -3, +9/2, -24. We're going to take those numbers in purple and add it to the second row, which I highlighted in green right there. So 3 and -3 makes 0. 2 and 9/2, well, that's the same thing as 14/2. I'm so sorry. The same thing as 4/2 plus 9/2, which is 13/2. I know fractions are scary. And then -2 plus -24 makes -26. And now we'll copy back in the old first row, or the previous first row, 1, -3/2, 8. So the first column is done. So we now move on to the second column. Where that 13/2 is at, we need a 1. So to make our 1, we'll again use the reciprocal. We'll multiply by 2/13. I hope I have enough room. We'll find out. As a comment, row 1 does not change, so I'm just going to copy in my row 1. So I don't have to worry about it anymore. So now we're going to multiply, I don't know if this will even show. You can see it. We're going to multiply this row by 2/13. 0 times 2/13 is 0. 13/2 by 2/13, because those are reciprocals, you get 1. And then -26 times 2/13, well, 26 over 13 is 2, so -2 times 2 is -4. Excellent. And lastly, where that -3/2 is at, we need a 0. Use your third operation. What should you multiply 1 by? So when you add it to -3/2, you get 0, +3/2. So multiply by the reciprocal to make 1s. Add the negative to make 0s. Oh, I'm writing on my logo here. Oh my God, the humanity. We are not changing row 2, so I'm just going to write that in just to get it over with. And off to the side, again in purple, let's write down what 3 halves times the second row looks like. So 3 halves times 0 is 0. 3 halves times 1 is 3 halves. And 3 halves times negative 4 is negative 6. Take those numbers in purple and add it to the first row, which I'm going to highlight here. And I think that's pink. I'm not sure. So 0 and 1. Oh, wrong color. Fixed it. 0 and 1 is 1. Remember, we're adding. Negative 3 halves and 3 halves is 0. 8 and negative 6 is 2. Reading across, this says that x is 2, y is negative 4. So that's the ordered pair 2, negative 4. We're going to do this again in part B. We have the same goal as last time. I'm going to write it up here. Okay. So there's a bunch of ways we can get a 1 where that 5 is at. Let's talk about them. 1, we could multiply the second row by negative 2 and add that to the first row. If we multiply the second row by negative 2, then this would create a negative 4 there. Added it to the 5. Negative 4 plus 5 is 1. Great. Another thing we could do is we could swap the rows and multiply the new first row by a half, because a half of 2 is 1. Either of those are perfectly acceptable. We should all result at the same answer despite the work being different. I'm going to, I'll multiply the second row by negative 2. I should do a different color though, so you don't get it confused with the. It's near Halloween when I'm making these videos, so we should use a pumpkin color. Can you read that, or is that too hard to read? I think red is too evil. How do I? Oh, there. That's I'll make a darker pumpkin color. Ooh, it's like a orangish brown. Okay, so it's a molding pumpkin. What are you going to do? So we'll do negative 2 row 2 plus row 1 makes the new row 1. So multiplying the second row by negative 2 makes negative 4, positive 8, negative 20. Taking those 3 numbers and adding it to the first row. So again, we're adding it to these 3 numbers here. That's Clover. She says hello. 5 and negative 4 makes our 1. 2 and 8 makes 10. Negative 20 and negative 8 makes negative 28. And copy back in our second row. Okay, now where that 2 is at, we need a 0. Remember to make zeros, use the third operation. We'll multiply the first row by negative 2, add that to the second row, and that'll make the new second row. Off to the side, negative 2 times the first row would be negative 2, negative 20. Oh no, what is that? Positive 56. We're doing it. Taking those 3 numbers and adding it to the second row. So these numbers here. Oh, that made it really pink. Sorry in advance. 2 and negative 2 make 0. Negative 4 and negative 20 make negative 24. And 10 and 56 make 66. All right, don't worry, it's going to be okay. And then we'll copy back in the first row. Okay. Where that negative 24 is at, we need a 1. So use the reciprocal, negative 1/24. I'm going to multiply that through the second row. Because the first row does not change, I'm going to write that in first. 1, 10, negative 28. All right, negative 1/24 times 0 is 0. Negative 1/24 times negative 24 is 1. And negative 1/24 times 60, ooh, that was weird, times 66 is 66, negative 66 over 24. They both have a 6 in common, so when you reduce that, you get negative 11/4. Delicious. Don't worry, it's going to be okay. Where that 10 is at, we need a 0. Use the 1 you just made. Negative 10 row 2 plus row 1 makes the new row 1. Row 2 is not changing, so I'm just going to put that in real quick. Off to the side, let's write down what negative 10 times row 2 looks like. Negative 10 times 0 is 0. Times 1 is negative 10. And times negative 11/4 is, I don't know, 110 over 4, so 55 over 2. Oh, this is terrible. Who wrote this problem? All right, let's add those three numbers to the previous row 1, so these guys here. So 0 and 1 make 1. Negative 10 and 10 make 0. 55 halves minus 28 is the same thing as 55 halves minus 56 halves, because you need a common denominator, which gives you negative 1/2. So x is negative 1/2, y is negative 11/4. Yummy. Make it a little pumpkin. Adorable.